The child was 7 when he saw his first witch burn. She wasn't a real witch, of course, just an old woman who sold herbs at the market and muttered prayers in a language no one recognized. But for little Tomas, clinging to his nursemaid's skirts in the crowd gathered on the square, it was a terrible and formative revelation. He didn't cry. He didn't close his eyes. He watched, with that disturbing intensity that already worried those close to him, as the flames consumed what he would later learn to call heresy. And when it was all over, when the smoke cleared and the crowd dispersed with murmurs, he asked in a clear voice, "Why didn't she cry out Jesus' name?" His nursemaid, Maria, a simple but intuitive woman, felt a shiver run down her spine. "Perhaps she didn't know it, little one." "Then it's good that she died," the child replied with chilling logic. "You can't go to heaven without knowing Jesus." Tomás de Torquemada was born into a family of minor converso nobility, those converted Jews who always walked the tightrope of suspicion. His uncle Juan was already a respected Dominican, and it was probably this religious lineage that saved the family from the persecutions that befell so many other conversos. But this origin weighed on the child like an invisible sword of Damocles. Very early, Tomás displayed excessive piety that was both reassuring and worrying. At 8, he was already fasting on Fridays until he fainted. At 10, he spent hours kneeling before the family crucifix, his lips moving in silent prayer, his eyes bright with a fervor that had nothing childlike about it. His mother, Isabel, sometimes found him asleep on the cold flagstones of their private chapel, his knees bloodied from hours of kneeling. "He hurts himself," she complained to her husband. "It's not normal for a child his age." "He's preparing himself," Pedro de Torquemada replied soberly. "God has plans for him, I'm certain." But it was mainly fear that motivated Pedro. Fear that their converso origin would be discovered. Fear that his son's excessive piety wouldn't be enough to erase that original sin. He had no idea he was creating a monster, for Tomás was developing a very particular understanding of faith. For him, there were no half measures, no gray areas. One was either with God or against him. One was pure or tainted. And this purity, he observed first in himself with manic vigilance. Every thought was scrutinized, every desire analyzed. At 12, he was already secretly flagellating himself, convinced that physical pain was the price to pay for spiritual purity. One day in 1440, when he was 12, an incident revealed the direction his life would take. During a religious procession, he spotted a man in the crowd who didn't cross himself as the cross passed. Others might have thought it simple distraction. Tomás saw it as a deliberate act of heresy. Without hesitation, he left the procession ranks and went to denounce the man to the officiating priest. The investigation that followed revealed that the man was indeed a converso who still secretly practiced Judaism. He was arrested, tried, and burned 3 months later. Tomás attended the execution with the same attention he brought to his theological studies. When it was all over, he felt neither joy nor sadness, but a deep and disturbing satisfaction. He had served God. "You have a gift," his uncle Juan told him that evening, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The gift of seeing what others don't see. But be careful, Tomás. This gift can become a curse if you don't use it wisely." But Tomás only heard the compliments. He had found his vocation. He would be God's watchdog, the one who would flush out heretics and preserve the purity of faith. This mission appeared to him not only as a duty, but as his reason for being. At 13, he entered the Dominican convent of Santa Cruz in Segovia. There, he discovered the writings of the Church Fathers on heresy, particularly those of St. Augustine that justified violence against the enemies of faith. These texts resonated within him like a revelation. Finally, he found theological legitimacy for his darkest instincts. His superiors quickly noticed his extraordinary zeal and sharp intelligence. But some also noted something disturbing in his gaze when he spoke of heretics, a gleam that wasn't quite Christian compassion. The prior, Dom Francisco, sometimes tried to temper his ardor. "Mercy, my son, is also a Christian virtue." "Mercy toward the sheep, yes," Tomás invariably replied, "but not toward the wolves that devour them." He was then 16 and his worldview was already crystallized. Humanity was divided into two camps: the pure and the impure, the faithful and the traitors, those who deserved salvation and those who deserved fire. And he, Tomás de Torquemada, saw himself as the instrument of this divine justice. The following years only refined this conviction. Ordained priest at 23, he began his ecclesiastical career with a reputation for absolute rigor and irreproachable orthodoxy. But behind this respectable facade hid a man who had transformed his own fear of impurity into a machine for crushing others. The child who had watched an old woman burn without flinching had become a man who would see in every pyre an act of divine love. For perhaps that was the most terrifying thing about Torquemada. He was sincere. In his tortured logic, every torture was an act of charity, every execution a pious work. He had succeeded in reconciling the irreconcilable, serving a God of love through hatred, preaching forgiveness through vengeance, celebrating life through death. The man who would terrorize Spain was born not from pure cruelty, but from that tragic perversion that transforms the highest spiritual aspirations into instruments of barbarity. And perhaps that was, finally, the most chilling lesson of his youth. Monsters aren't always born from evil. They sometimes spring from misguided good, from love transformed into obsession, from faith changed into fanaticism. The little boy who wanted to save the world had become the man who nearly destroyed it.
Since you watched until the end, subscribe, like, and comment.